Hello, I'm Maruk Said, your microbiology guide. Let's explore in-depth micro techniques and uncover groundbreaking insight together on this educational journey into the fascinating realms of microbes.
Inside a bacterial cell, beyond the massive tangles of its primary chromosomal DNA, you will find a secondary genetic structure floating independently in the cytoplasm. This is a plasmid. It is an extra-chromosomal, double-stranded, circular DNA molecule.
If you have watched till here, don't forget to subscribe to Family of Science Lovers. Press the bell icon button so you are always updated.
Depending on the specific type, a plasmid can be as small as 1 kilobase or as large as 500 kilobases. In nature, plasmids function as accessory genetic elements. They are entirely self-replicating and carry genes that provide specific survival advantages to the host bacteria, such as specialized metabolic functions or virulence factors and antibiotic resistance. In recombinant DNA technology, we do not deploy these natural plasmids in their original state. We restructure them entirely. Naturally occurring plasmids carry unnecessary bulk. In the laboratory, scientists strip these molecules down to their essential genetic sequences, removing unneeded sections to increase stability and adding specific sequences to improve their efficiency as carriers. To understand how this works, we have to look at the anatomy of a modern vector, building it up from first principles by isolating its core structural components and regulatory mechanisms. By isolating and engineering these individual components, scientists turn a basic biological survival tool into a highly customizable delivery vehicle, capable of transporting foreign genetic material across biological boundaries. We begin our construction with a blank circular DNA backbone. To make this functional, we need to add the required components step by step. The first absolute requirement is an engine to drive duplication. This sequence is called the origin of replication, or ORI. This animated sequence shows the biochemical necessity of the ORI. Notice this specific region is heavily composed of adenine and thymine base pairs. Because AT pairs share only 2 hydrogen bonds, they require far less energy to separate. This lower energy threshold allows helicase and DNA polymerase to easily pry the strands apart, bind to the DNA, and initiate the continuous process of rolling circle replication. Variations in the ORI sequence directly regulate the plasmid copy number and determine which host organisms can successfully recognize and replicate the vector. However, high plasmid copy numbers introduce a major vulnerability. Forcing the cell to maintain hundreds of plasmid copies consumes vast cellular resources. Because of this metabolic burden, host cells will naturally discard these plasmids during cell division to conserve energy. To counter this, we must engineer a second component into the plasmid backbone, the selectable marker. The most common approach is inserting an antibiotic resistance gene, such as the sequence for ampicillin resistance, directly into the vector. This creates intense selective pressure. When the bacteria are grown in an environment saturated with antibiotics, any cell that has discarded the plasmid is immediately destroyed. Only the transformed cells containing the plasmid can survive and multiply.
Download our microbiology study app made for researchers like you.
The vector is now self-sustaining. The origin of replication forces the host to aggressively duplicate the DNA, and the selectable marker enforces a lethal biological ultimatum, ensuring the host never discards it. With duplication and retention secured, the vector requires a designated docking bay to accept foreign genetic material. This is the multiple cloning site. The multiple cloning site is a dense, short sequence of DNA containing up to 20 different restriction enzyme recognition sites deliberately clustered together. In this diagram, we see the critical first step of DNA insertion. A specific restriction enzyme is used to cleave the double-stranded DNA of the vector within the cloning site. Crucially, the exact same enzyme cuts the foreign gene of interest. With identical cuts, they possess perfectly complementary ends. The target gene slots exactly into the opening of the plasmid ring. To make this temporary connection permanent, an enzyme called DNA ligase is introduced, chemically fusing the sugar phosphate backbones together to form one continuous ring. This process is why the restriction sites engineered into the multiple cloning site must be strictly unique. If those target sequences appeared anywhere else on the plasmid, the restriction enzyme would chop the entire vector into useless fragments. Through this precise sequence of enzymatic digestion and ligation, a generic circular backbone is converted into a specialized recombinant genetic payload. At this stage, the vector is structurally sound, but engineering a plasmid to perfectly duplicate a gene does not guarantee the host cell will actually read that gene to produce a protein. This creates a divergence in vector design. The first path produces cloning vectors. These are optimized strictly for stability, small size, and ease of manipulation. Their only job is massive DNA amplification. The second path produces expression vectors. These require an entirely different architectural mindset, designed not just to copy DNA, but to force the cell to synthesize recombinant proteins. To synthesize proteins, expression vectors must successfully hijack the host's transcriptional machinery. As we see in this structural comparison, the expression vector requires complex regulatory sequences, a promoter placed upstream of the cloning site, and a terminator placed downstream. The promoter sequence acts as a binding site for host transcription factors. RNA polymerase binds to the promoter and initiates transcription, moving across the foreign gene to synthesize a strand of messenger RNA. Without a precise stopping mechanism, the polymerase would continue reading indefinitely. This is the function of the terminator sequence. Packed with GC-rich inverted repeats, the terminator is transcribed into RNA that immediately binds to itself, forming a rigid hairpin loop. The sudden physical formation of this loop jams the transcription machinery. RNA polymerase pauses, detaches from the DNA template, and releases the completed mRNA transcript into the cell. Cloning vectors operate as high-speed biological photocopiers, but the addition of these precise regulatory sequences turns expression vectors into fully programmed biological factories. Even with these mechanisms in place, researchers face a critical blind spot during the transformation process. The antibiotic resistance marker proves a cell successfully absorbed a plasmid, but it cannot prove that the plasmid actually contains the newly inserted target gene. To solve this, researchers developed the pUC19 vector. It introduces an elegant biological logic gate that resolves this blind spot instantly. This diagram shows the architectural trick of pUC19. The vector's multiple cloning site is embedded directly into the center of the coding region for the LAC-C alpha gene. This utilizes a mechanism called insertional inactivation. If the target DNA successfully ligates into the cloning site, it physically breaks the LAC-C alpha sequence apart, destroying the gene's ability to function. Under normal conditions, an intact LAC-Z alpha gene participates in alpha complementation, combining with host cell peptides to form a functional enzyme called beta-galactosidase. When these bacteria are grown on specific chromogenic media, cells containing empty, non-recombinant plasmids successfully produce this enzyme, process the chemical substrate in the agar, and turn their colonies visibly blue. But the successful recombinant cells, the ones carrying the foreign target gene, have a broken LAC-C alpha sequence. They cannot form the enzyme. They cannot process the substrate. Their colonies remain completely white. By utilizing this mechanism, pUC19 translates microscopic molecular events into a macroscopic binary color code, bypassing complex genetic sequencing to give researchers an immediate visual confirmation of success. These modular, engineered DNA loops serve as the foundational infrastructure for modern biotechnology and pharmaceutical manufacturing. Here we see the historical proof of this application. By engineering expression vectors, early researchers successfully forced bacterial cells to synthesize active human therapeutics, creating the first scalable production method for human insulin. Today, the applications scale from the metabolic engineering of microbial pathways to maximize industrial yields, to delivering precision gene editing constructs that enhance pathogen resistance in global crop genomes. By isolating, refining, and rebuilding the architecture of the plasmid vector, researchers have learned how to write and compile custom software for the operating system of life.
If you have watched till here, don't forget to subscribe to Family of Science Lovers. Press the bell icon button so you are always updated.
A huge leap forward in how scientists work with DNA. We're talking about an innovation that literally changed the speed of science itself. So here's the big question that frames our whole story today. How on earth did we go from a tedious 2-day-long search in a lab to getting the answer you need with just a single glance? It's a fantastic story of scientific elegance and efficiency, so let's get into it. Okay, before we can really introduce our two main players, we've got to understand the tool they're based on. The absolute hero of this entire process is something called a plasmid. You could call it the unsung workhorse of molecular biology. So what exactly is a plasmid? The easiest way to think about it is like a tiny biological USB drive. It's this little loop of DNA that hangs out inside bacteria, separate from their main chromosome. And its job? Well, it's the perfect little vehicle, or vector, for carrying new genes into a cell. It's absolutely fundamental to how we do genetic engineering. Now, for this little USB drive to actually be useful for scientists, it needs a few key components. First, you've got the origin of replication, or ORI. That's the go signal that tells the cell, hey, make more copies of me. Then you have a selectable marker, which is kind of like a built-in tracking device, usually an antibiotic resistance gene, so we can easily find the bacteria that actually picked up our plasmid. And finally, the multiple cloning site, or MCS. This is the good stuff. It's the specific spot with a bunch of cut here signs where we can insert our new gene. All right, time to meet our first contender, pBR322. You gotta respect the classics, right? This plasmid came on the scene back in the 1970s, and for its time, it was a total game changer. It really opened the door to the kind of gene cloning we think of today. So let's take a quick look at its stats. It was created by two scientists, Bolivar and Rodriguez. That's where the BR comes from. It has a pretty low copy number, meaning a cell only makes about 15 to 20 copies of it. But here's the most important detail. It's two selectable markers. It gave bacteria resistance to two different antibiotics, ampicillin and tetracycline. And that clever little feature was both its greatest strength and its biggest weakness. And that brings us right to the heart of the problem with pBR322. See, the way it helped you find the bacteria with your gene was clever, sure, but man, it was a major bottleneck in the lab. Okay, stick with me here. First, you'd insert your gene of interest smack dab in the middle of that tetracycline resistance gene. This breaks it. Then you grow all your bacteria on a plate with ampicillin. This is called positive selection. If a bacterium didn't pick up the plasmid, it dies. Easy enough. But now you have to find which of the survivors actually has your gene inserted. So you have to painstakingly copy every single surviving colony onto a second plate, this one with tetracycline. And here's the wildest part. The colonies you're looking for are the ones that die on the second plate. It works, but it's just so indirect and clunky. You can see where this is going, right? This whole process was incredibly time-consuming. It wasn't very efficient, and trying to perfectly copy colonies from one plate to another, well, it was really easy to make a mistake. Scientists knew there had to be a better way. And that's the question that really sparked the next big innovation. What if you could skip that whole second plate? What if you could just look and know you had the right one instantly? And the answer to that question came in the form of a major upgrade, the pUC series of plasmids, and we're focusing on pUC19. This thing was designed from the ground up to solve all those headaches from pBR322. I mean, just look at them side by side. The difference is obvious. pUC19 is way smaller, which actually helps it make more copies inside the cell. But the real genius move was in the selection method. It kept the ampicillin resistance, but it completely ditched the second antibiotic marker. And in its place, it added something totally new, a special reporter gene called LAC-Z alpha. And that one little change, adding that reporter gene, kicked off what scientists now call the blue-white revolution. This method is so brilliantly simple, it completely transformed the day-to-day grind in the lab. So the core idea is actually the same one pBR322 used. It's called insertional inactivation. You're still sticking your gene into the middle of another gene to break it, but instead of breaking an antibiotic resistance gene, you're breaking that LAC-Z alpha gene. And the result isn't about life or death for the bacteria, it's just a simple change of color. So how does this magic trick work? It's beautifully simple. You pop your gene into the multiple cloning site, which is sitting right inside that LAC-Z alpha gene. Then you put the plasmids into your bacteria, spread them on a single plate that has a special chemical in it, and that's it. You just wait for them to grow and you look. And here it is. This is the aha moment. If the LAC-Z alpha gene is working fine, meaning your gene didn't get inserted, the colony turns a brilliant blue. But if you successfully inserted your gene, it breaks LAC-Z alpha, and the colony can't make the blue color, so it stays white. It's that simple. Blue is a bust. White means you've got it. A direct, visual answer, all in one step. So let's bring it all home. Why was this such a massive, revolutionary upgrade? What was the actual real-world impact of switching from the old pBR322 to the sleek, new pUC19? I mean, this table really says it all, doesn't it? pBR322 was the pioneer. It was brilliant, but its selection method was slow and labor-intensive. pUC19 was the innovator. It was smaller, faster, and used a visual, single-step screen. The jump in efficiency wasn't just small, it was huge. It turned a multi-day ordeal into something you could figure out just by glancing at a dish. But here's the most crucial takeaway. The invention of pUC19 and blue-white screening wasn't just about making a scientist's day a little easier. By slashing the time it took to do a fundamental experiment and dramatically reducing the chance for error, it literally accelerated the pace of discovery for everyone. It let scientists get to the answers faster. You know, the journey from pBR322 to pUC19 is just a perfect example of how making our basic tools better can completely revolutionize an entire field of science. And it really makes you wonder, what tedious process in a lab right now is just waiting for its own blue-white moment? What's going to be the next big leap that changes everything all over again?
Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, press the bell icon button. Thank you!